over the rape claims. During this period, Assange was known to be travelling widely, preparing the massive bundle of State Department leaks, raising the question of how motivated he would have been to spend time answering questions back in Sweden. Assange's lawyer, though, argued that he'd been receiving death threats from America and, far from being on the run from Sweden, was in hiding for his own safety. And as Assange himself left the court for the day, he continued to insist the Swedish prosecutor had acted unlawfully.
And what we've seen is process abuse after process abuse being revealed for hours and hours. There is not just one senior prosecutor who originally dropped these charges, as we thought, who believed that the case against me in Sweden was wrong, but rather the current prosecutor's deputy also has made those claims.
And there was this challenge to Marianne Nee.
We have seen a prosecutor who has been ready to feed the media with information, but has been unprepared to come here and subject herself to the cross-examination she knows she cannot withstand. I challenge you, Marianne Nee. Marianne Nee, come to London, come on Friday, subject yourself to the cross-examination by Geoffrey Robertson QC.
The case will now resume on Friday. Whatever the outcome, either side can appeal the verdict. In this saga, there is no end in sight. Lawrence Lee, Al Jazeera, London.
North and South Korea have met for the first time since 4 people were killed in the shelling of a South Korean island last November. The talks are aimed at easing tensions on the Korean peninsula and kick-starting the stalled North Korean nuclear negotiations. Al Jazeera's Harry Fawcett is in Seoul.
What's in a handshake? Reading the finer points of inter-Korean diplomacy is never easy, but this meeting of colonels at the truce village of Panmunjom certainly appeared less frosty than the last one in September. All the more remarkable, given what's happened in the meantime. When North Korean artillery rained down on the island of Yeonpyeong, killing 2 South Korean civilians and 2 Marines last November, there were genuine fears of escalating conflict. North Korea raised the spectre of nuclear war. The South insisted it was ready to fight. Earlier in March, a much greater loss of life on the South Korean frigate Cheonan, 46 killed in a sinking blamed by the South on a North Korean torpedo. Tuesday's talks were the result of a remarkable change in tone from Pyongyang. Since January calling for dialogue, late last month Seoul suddenly agreed, dropping its demand for an apology for the Yeonpyeong and Cheonan incidents. Seoul is demanding, though, responsible measures on the issue from the other side. Both are under pressure from their allies in Beijing and Washington to restart stalled 6-party talks on North Korea's nuclear weapons program. The fact that these talks have taken place is in itself significant, a sign of just how quickly things can change on this peninsula. But as 2 unexpected fatal incidents last year showed, they can change again for the worse just as quickly. Harry Fawcett, Al Jazeera, Seoul.
Hello again, this is Al Jazeera. Adrian Finnegan here in Doha with the stories making headlines this hour. Thousands of demonstrators are continuing to rally in Cairo in protest at the government of Hosni Mubarak, including 3,000 who are outside the country's parliament building. That's after Vice President Omar Suleiman appeared on television today promising constitutional reforms and immunity from prosecution for demonstrators. He's now been criticized by the White House.
Yesterday, I think the Vice President Suleiman made some particularly unhelpful comments about Egypt not being ready for democracy, about not seeing a lift of the emergency law, and I don't think that in any way squares with what those seeking greater opportunity and freedom think is a timetable for progress.
Meanwhile, an activist whose Facebook page inspired Egypt's uprising has been freed by authorities in Cairo. Wael Ghanim had been detained for 12 days and addressed the protesters today in Tahrir Square, saying that change was necessary. He was arrested during an anti-government rally on January 28th. Al Jazeera's obtained exclusive footage of the funeral of an Afghan detainee who died in US custody at Guantanamo Bay last week. Awal Gul was held for nearly 9 years over alleged links to the Taliban and al-Qaeda. According to the US military, he died last week of apparent natural causes, but his family disputes this. A British court hearing on Sweden's request to extradite WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange will resume on Friday. Assange has been back in court in the UK for a second day to have the move against him thrown out. He's wanted for questioning in Sweden over allegations of sexual assault against 2 women. Pirates are reported to have taken control of an Italian oil tanker. The Italian Navy said that shots were fired at the Savina Kalin, but there were no injuries. It happened some 1,200 kilometers off the coast of Somalia. A 10-month US inquiry has found that there is no link between electronic throttles and unintended acceleration in Toyota vehicles. That's after the Japanese car giant recalled more than 8 million cars in a controversy over its manufacturing process. The news announced just hours after Toyota reported a 39% drop in quarterly profits to December. Now here's Egypt burning.
January 2011. History unfolding.
And now things are getting worse by the moment.
This film tells the story of 5 days when the people of Egypt broke through a barrier of fear they had known for a generation and rose in revolt against their president.
Police are knocking on our door. The police is on their way up to our office. I will stay on the air if I can until the police come. We're going to keep these images for you guys live until we are actually forced off the air either by the police or if our signal is somehow interrupted.
Small networks of activists were gearing up for mass action. They'd been agitating against President Mubarak's autocratic rule for years. But they never had attracted mass support until another Arab country rose up against its tyrant.
The protests haven't kicked off just yet. They're expected to start in the coming couple of hours. This is going to be a real test whether online activism in Egypt can translate into real action. Anger has been on the rise in Egypt for the past couple of years, but we have seen similar calls fizzle out. The main difference now is that these calls are coming after what happened in Tunisia, which seems to have not only inspired activists, but actually ordinary Egyptians, a dozen of whom we have seen set themselves on fire in copycat self-immolations similar to the one that had sparked the uprising in Tunisia.
Their demands simple: political freedoms, an end to state corruption, and a better quality of life for the impoverished population.
Anger had been brewing in Egypt for years now. The last 2 years, we witnessed several strikes in the country, rising unemployment. Sectarian tension was on the rise.
Well, I think anyone who's lived or spent time in Egypt would tell you there were plenty of signs that suggested that people in Egypt were growing increasingly frustrated. But I don't think anyone could have genuinely predicted that thousands of Egyptians would defy and challenge the government and its various security apparatuses.
President Mubarak and his National Democratic Party are apparently as secure in power as ever on the eve of the planned demonstrations.
What happened that day was that tens of thousands of people, tens of thousands of Egyptians, different parts of the country took to the streets. Not stationary protests as we were used to seeing here in Egypt. They were actually marching from one neighborhood to another at the heart of Cairo.
Are we expecting to see trouble?
It's difficult to judge at this early stage.
They started marching onto different parts of the capital, the strategic buildings perhaps that symbolized their plight or their agony, the ruling National Party headquarters, the state television, the foreign ministry.
The ruling party is the symbol of that forest protest. protesters are concerned and activists are concerned, which is why they're trying to stage this protest now in front of the ruling party.
Just listen to the chants roaring in downtown Cairo, the hundreds of people walking to the streets. It's unprecedented for people to march to the streets this way as an act of protest without security trying to prevent them. The people we've seen taken to the streets today are not the 50, 60 activists that we've been seeing protesting in Egypt for the past 5-6 years. These were normal Egyptians.
Thousands marched peacefully in the morning, their ultimate goal to reach the city's heart, Tahrir Square.